Well, I was going to say that during the Smart Set and American Mercury phase, you were also quite active in the Sun through that column, The Freelance, that appeared every Monday.
Part of that phase. I started the freelance column in 1911 and gave it up in 1915. 4 years. It overlapped the Smart Set phase during those years. I was either literary critic of the Smart Set or editor all that time. But that column I gave up for various reasons. One thing, it was a burden. I had too many other enterprises, and doing a daily column was a very severe burden, and I began to get tired of it.
Well, you went back to that column after a lapse of years.
No.
Under another title?
No.
Didn't you?
After the First World War, when the kind of stuff that I was writing could be printed again, I went back to the Sun to write a weekly article.
That's what I meant.
That must have been in...
Monday article.
Yeah, it must have been in 1918 or 19, and I kept that up to... I kept it up 15 or 16 years at least.
And it had a tremendous impact on the life of Baltimore, as you know.
I doubt it.
Well, I can speak from personal experience.
It may have had on you personally, but on the town as a whole, my opinion is that it hardly made a ripple.
Well, I was working as a reporter
Yeah.
at the time, and I know that hardly a day went by, a week went by, when a bushel of letters didn't come in as a result of that Monday column. Letters usually calling you all kinds of names and disagreeing violently with everything you said, which was partly the object of the column.
The volume of mail that comes in to a magazine or a newspaper or a radio station is no index of anything, except that you happen to attract a lot of idiots, because most people that write letters to newspapers are fools. The intelligent people seldom do it. They do it sometimes, but not often. I used to, in my days running a column, I welcomed the letters that came in, and in fact edited them. I was in charge of the letter column and always let anybody that denounced me violently get in, because it was, I believe that people like to read abuse. And I didn't care what they said to me. I was much too vain to care what such idiots believed about me. In fact, I'd have been ashamed if they praised me. And so letters praising me very seldom got in that column.
Well, with uncharacteristic modesty, I think you're underplaying the influence of those Monday pieces on Baltimore. I came into the picture myself in 1920 as a young and somewhat starry-eyed reporter.
Yeah.
And at that time, and for the next 5 years, I mingled with the staff, with the underlings, and I know that you were regarded as a sort of a demigod, sort of a person high up on Olympus who was in contact with all the literary greats, who was discovering novelists who could have a novel published by letter of recommendation and so forth.
I think you're describing an unusual situation that might be almost described as pathological.
Well,
the trouble with you
I shared that condition.
Yeah, the trouble with you is that you were an idealist, and you took that thing much too seriously, and certainly much more seriously than I did.
Well, many of the young men were idealists at that time.
Yeah, there were more of them. They were younger to begin with. Now you're an old man, just as I am, and I'm even older, and our idealism is out. Although I must say for myself that I never was an idealist.
It doesn't exist today among the younger members of the staff now. There's no such thing. That's the kind of spirit that we had, a kind of ambition, a kind
One of the things that puzzles me about the modern young newspaper man is, what does he do in his leisure? He has much more leisure than did in my time and yours. I worked all the time. He works 5 days a week. What does he do?
Well, one day he plays poker or plays golf, and the other day his wife drags him off to the movies. Or he stays home and minds the children while his wife goes out and plays bridge.
Well, all those things would have been considered not only degrading, but impossible psychologically at my time.
In 1920, most of us were bachelors, and as we would say now, wolves, playing around, very irresponsible, all of us shooting for the stars and falling short generally. Today, the majority of reporters, I think you'll find, are married and have small children and responsibility.
Yes, that's probably true, but the idea of a newspaper reporter with any self-respect playing golf is to me almost inconceivable. I hear that even printers now play golf. God almighty, that's dreadful to think of. I remember printers in my time. I knew a great many intimately. I always had to do with makeup on the papers, and hence I knew the printers. And I was very fond of them, and they were fine fellows, but golf playing it'd just seem as incredible as to hear of a printer going to a dance. Printers spent their leisure mainly in saloons, and in summer on the shores down the rivers below Baltimore. They were an intelligent man, the good ones. I learned a great deal more about the newspaper business from printers than I ever learned from editors. Great deal more. But now, when you hear of a printer going out and they're dressing himself up and playing golf, the thing is really obscene. It's dreadful to think of it.
Well, the New Deal certainly had its effect in newspaper offices.
Yeah.
When you were a young reporter, and when I was a reporter, there was a great deal of freedom and camaraderie and low pay going with it and so forth, and long hours. I remember working from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 11 at night, sometimes straight through. But the day the Guild
I
has
did that
changed
every
all
day.
Now we have a 40-hour week and so forth, and it has changed the whole characteristic, for better or for worse.
You could no more have a 40-hour week for a good newspaper reporter than you could have a 40-hour week for an archbishop. It's just not possible. A good reporter, he simply refuses to let a story go when he's got his teeth into it. And he wants assignments. I remember when I went down the office in the morning, certainly the thing that interested me wasn't whether I'd get a lot of time off and go home early, but whether I'd get some good assignments. Mm-hmm. If I got the good assignments, I didn't care how long I worked. I worked many a time all night. When the Baltimore fire happened in February 1904, I was a young city editor. They dug me out of bed about 11 o'clock in the morning. Said a big fire started downtown. I went downtown. I never got my clothes off or slept until Wednesday morning at 4 o'clock. That's from Sunday to Wednesday. I suppose that's almost a record for continuous work. I grant you that there were moments when I drowsed at my desk, but I never stretched out to sleep until Wednesday morning. And far from looking on that as oppressive or keeping an account of overtime, I was delighted with the opportunity. I was young, I was ambitious, and I liked the job. I get the impression from the modern reporter that he doesn't really like his work. He wishes he were a druggist.
Mm-hmm.
Or he wishes he had a good job.
Or a dramatist.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. The reporter with literary ambitions is one that I always respected. But most of the reporters that I encounter these days haven't even got literary ambitions. They never write anything outside the office.
Well, many a good reporter that we both knew has turned press agent.
Well, in my time, a press agent was looked on as a loathsome creature. Nobody paid any attention to him, and there was a rule on the Sun for many years that if a man ever became a press agent, he never could come back to the Sun.
Now he's a public relations counsel. And makes
He's just
makes
the same.
$15,000 a year.
Yeah, he's just as bad as he was before. The thing that distresses me about press agentry is a simple one. I have seen so many good men become press agents of one kind or other, and there's a subtle corruption of their minds that they never get over. They simply can't recover from that horror. They're engaged in, if they're good journalists, some of them are. Remember, the worst men didn't become press agents, but often the best. And, they know deep in their hearts that the thing is not a dignified trade. And they rationalize their necessities in one way or other, but they don't rationalize them enough to get rid of them. And
You
They
covered
go.
some very large and interesting newspaper stories in your day when you were acting independently and choosing your own assignments. I remember, for instance, the Scopes trial.
Oh.
That was a lot of fun.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
With an overtone of tragedy, don't you think?
Yes, it was a dreadful thing to think of presumably civilized people falling into such a slough. And it was a dreadful thing to look at a man like Bryan, a man with his opportunities in the world, to see what he had come to intellectually in his old age. It was a tragedy in a way, but I should add at once, it wasn't a tragedy to me. I wasn't suffering anything, I was enjoying it. I enjoyed it tremendously.
Who would not enjoy that remark, that famous remark of Bryan? You remember
What's that?
when he said that man is not a mammal?
Yeah. Well, I see nothing remarkable about that because that is the belief of a very large section of the American people. If they're actually Christians, they can't believe that man's a mammal. And personally, I believe he is. But I have no particular horror of the man who believes it isn't. He seems to me an amiably comic character, just like a man who believes that if you put a horsehair in a bottle of water, it'll turn into a snake. Or the man who believes that Friday is an unlucky day. I should add at once that I am one of those who do believe that Friday is an unlucky day. And like nearly all agnostics, I'm very superstitious. And I would no more undertake any work of importance on Friday the 13th than I'd jump off a house.
You are still an agnostic. You've
Oh,
held
yeah.
very faithfully to that.
Yeah. I was born an agnostic. My father was one ahead of me and his father ahead of him. So agnosticism is nothing new to me. I'll point out one of the strange corollaries, and that is this. A man who is an agnostic by inheritance, so that he doesn't remember any time that he wasn't, has almost no hatred for the religious. I get on very well with all kinds of ecclesiastics and all kinds of pious people because I don't have any evil conscience in the matter. I'm not a renegade.
No feeling of sin.
No feeling of sin whatever. I assume that they've got a right to believe anything they please. Being an extreme libertarian and believing in free speech and every other kind of freedom up to the last limits of the endurable. I think there is a limit beyond which free speech can't go, but it's a limit that's very seldom mentioned. It's the point where free speech begins to collide with the right to privacy. I don't think there are any other conditions in free speech. I've got a right to say and believe anything I please, but I haven't got a right to press it on anybody else. For example, take for instance the Catholic Church, which I am on good terms with personally, but have no belief in whatsoever. I've got a right to print my dissent from its doctrines, to utter them. I have exercised that right for many years. But I have no right to go on the cathedral steps on Sunday morning when the Catholics are coming out of High Mass and make a speech denouncing them. I don't think there is any such right. Nobody's got a right to be a nuisance to his neighbors.
Or to hurt his neighbor's feelings.
To hurt their feelings wantonly. If they come to him and say, what do you think of this Mass that we've just finished? I think he has a right to answer. But he has no right to press his opinions on them. Well, of course, you'll notice the peculiar thing about the United States where there is very little free speech. Free speech is a very limited right in this country, as I have learned to my bitter experience more than once. Yet it is a country where the right to press opinions on reluctant hearers is carried to a development that is unheard of on earth. The whole country's full of propagandists who are bothering everybody all the time. I get in the mail every morning tremendous piles of propaganda of one kind or other, and I can easily imagine a man who would resent that, who would think it's a nuisance. And he ought to have there ought to be some way to save him from that annoyance. Personally, I don't care, because when I get propaganda and with it there is one of those reply plate postal cards or envelopes, I always send it back empty, without any writing on it. They have to pay 4 cents to get it back, and it's my quiet way of saying that for you.